So we're going to get into the shops now, and so we're going to be with talking to Tenjin, Couchbase, and DataStax. And Tenjin, we've got Dwight Merriman, who's the CEO, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that you guys do and why your solution is so boss?
Hi. So before I get into that, I think it's really great that you guys set up this meeting. I think it's really helpful. So thanks for that. And so I'm Dwight from Tenjin. We started the MongoDB project and we're commercializing it. So actually, I find this slide pretty amazing. I mean, that's really cool and not inconsistent with what I've seen, but probably quantified more than a lot of folks do. But qualitatively, they're feeling the same thing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole space rather than Mongo too much. So I'm glad we already heard some about it because I'm not going to talk about it unless you ask questions. So if you think about how the database space has evolved, if we go back 20 years, very common to use a relational database. You probably deploy Oracle or DB2, and you do everything on it, right? You do OLTP, and you'd also do reporting, data warehousing. Like you probably do Rollup on it. So at one point in time, this was like a very kind of standard best practice way to do things, right? And then 10 years later, it changed a little bit. We started to see a new segment, right? So we had all these tools that were just for business intelligence and data warehousing, right? We still had our DB2 or Oracle for OLTP and other kind of operational data problems, but then you also started to see these things like Teradata and Netezza and more recently things like Astrodata, Greenplum, et cetera. So we had this new space which was very different, and so what's very common today in an enterprise is that you have both, right? I think like any Fortune 500 company has both, and it makes perfect sense, right? So we have a couple tools, so it's not one size fits all, even if we look back a few years, right? And there's also some other segments, right? Like information retrieval, full text search, things like time series databases. But I'm gonna kind of put those aside just for simplicity at the moment, because these are the two big buckets that we've seen for the last 10 years. So what I think is going to happen with evolution is in the next slide, which is where instead of two buckets, we're going to see three, right? So we're not going to use 10 data storage tools, but I think we'll use 3. And so we're still going to have our data warehouse. If this is for a big company, right? If you're a small company, you might choose one tool just for simplicity and because you only have so many people to run these things. And whatever your bread and butter use case is, you'll pick the one that does that really well, and then you also use it for everything else, and it'll be a little harder than these other things if they were in place. But if you're a big company, I think you're going to have all 3 over time. So we'll still have these traditional segments, but in addition, there'll be this NoSQL segment, which is really a more accurate way to describe them would be scalable non-relational databases. NoSQL is the term people like to use. So what I think is going to happen is, like if we look at the kind of space of use cases out there, the biggest set of use cases this stuff makes sense for is more operational data problems, right? So lots of reads and writes all day long at high volumes. So it's going to pull more from your classic Oracle type solution, or not. It's going to segment what you used to use Oracle for. You're still going to use it, but it's going to be, maybe half the use cases that you were using it for still makes perfect sense for. Half of them, these new technologies make sense. And what you want to use one for versus the other will vary, and there's trade-offs. And you also see these NoSQL things being used for some analytics and business intelligence problems, and thus that it kind of creeps over that way a bit too. But I think the bigger chunk will be from more the operational side of the database world. So this is a little bit more on kind of like the characteristics of the use cases you might use one of these for or another for. So in the data warehouse space, the existing products have some nice properties, right? So first of all, that's where you see a lot of client-server computing, right? So I want to use business objects as a data visualization tool. I want to talk to some arbitrary database technology, and I have a nice intermediate standard way to talk to that, which is SQL and ODBC or JDBC. So that's great, and so we need that for client server. We need that common layer in the middle. So that's why I think you're still going to see these. Now, if you have special problems like very high scales, or you need to do some very computational scoring, then I think you can use some of the Hadoop or some of these other tools. But there'll still be a lot in this space, and it may not even change that much. One of the interesting things about the data warehousing space is it's easier to scale, right? Instead of having millions of tiny queries, we have a few big queries, so we can just send it to all the servers in the cluster and merge back a result, and that can be efficient. We also bulk load data. We don't have writes going on all day long. That makes the problem a lot easier. And we can even make some assumptions about the schemas, right? It's probably a star schema or snowflake schema or something like that. So if you put all those things together, you can scale it, right? And some of these solutions scale pretty well. So that's a space which I think is still going to be there. Your traditional sort of RDBMS space is still going to be there, but it's not going to scale very well horizontally. You might have it and use it, and it might be a good solution for a certain use case, but it's not because it's scaling. Distributed joins are very hard to scale, and at a certain size, distributed transactions are too. If I have a 1,000 node cluster, that's going to be challenging too to get the very high throughputs.